Hey Eric, how are you?
I'm great, Jen. Thank you. My voice is a little scratchy, but how are you?
You've been going hard lately, huh?
Yeah, we're making it happen. Isn't it?
Good for you. I'm well, thanks.
Good. Glad to hear it.
Let's see. How's our volume? Am I
All
okay?
right.
I never know.
You sound good.
Yeah. Awesome. Hi, Johnny.
Evening. I'm still,
Hello.
I'm still using an Android phone, so this might start going wrong again.
Last time we went for a while. I'm surprised it took so long for it to rug one of us. Um, so I'm just going to jump right in. Last time, we went for 2 hours and we still weren't able to get to the community. And I definitely want to make sure that we were able to address them. Hey, Mark, how are you?
I'm very well, Jen. Thank you for asking.
Good. So I'm just going to jump right in. Thank you guys again for joining me. And thank you to all of the listeners and to the audience for joining us as well. I'm Jen, and I'm joined here by Jonny and Eric of LinkPool and Mark of Bancor. And really excited to have you guys back. Thank you for being here. I would love to start with intros. Jonny, if you wouldn't mind starting us off, maybe just introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jonny. I'm the founder of LinkPool. Been working on top of and working with Chainlink for quite some time now. Since the start. Just building tools and platforms on top of Chainlink to make the barrier of entry lower for everyone involved.
Perfect. Thank you. Eric, if you wouldn't mind, I can hand it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Eric. I've been with LinkPool for 3 years now. Started off working on the community side, and as things have progressed, I head up the integration team now. I'm also a community development contributor for Chainlink Labs. Happy to be hanging out with y'all today and chatting about staking and Bancor V3.
Thank you so much, and happy to have you back. Mark, would you mind introducing yourself and just telling us a little bit about you?
Yeah, certainly. So my name is Mark Richardson. I am the product architect and the head of research at Bancor. And so I am, working every day to try and solve cryptocurrency's liquidity problems. Is that good enough? I don't want to spend too much time introducing myself.
No, you're perfect. Thank you. So I know that, it's the part two, but I'd still like to assume a couple of things. The first being that somebody listening in and joining us today wasn't here for our original AMA. And the second was that we might have somebody who's new to DeFi and new to staking. So I know we'll probably get, a little bit deeper as the conversation goes, but there are so many different types of staking, and I think the best thing to do would just be focus on Oracle networks and DeFi, considering. Jonny or Eric, maybe you guys, how would you best define or explain staking in terms of Oracle networks?
John, want to go for it?
Yeah, sure. At a high level, staking for Oracle networks is providing collateral to secure the operations on top of the Chainlink network. So whether that be, its price feeds, CCIP, VRF, and it provides economic incentives for people to behave well, and also earn rewards with user fees.
Eric, do you have anything to add?
I think that was a pretty succinct description, right? Chainlink has plenty of blog posts about, what staking means across different protocols, and really it means a ton of different things depending on what you're talking about, right? Like staking is a DeFi platform means one thing, and staking for a proof of stake network means another thing. And what Jonny described is specifically what staking means within the Chainlink ecosystem, and it's pretty different. It's pretty substantially different. It provides different benefits and has different trade-offs. So,
I wonder if I might. Sorry, Jen, I didn't mean to ask questions and stuff, but just with regards to that question, I was wondering if either of you could elaborate on like what it is about the staking utility, right? When a user stakes, Link against the network, how does that create security? Like, where does that security come from?
Absolutely, Mark. That's a great question. Um, in the context of a Chainlink node specifically, our understanding at this time is that essentially that, like Jonny said, that link gets put up as collateral. So a node either is they're ensuring that they're going to both behave honestly, right? That they're going to deliver real data, and also generally preventing Byzantine behavior, whether that means that they're going to be down for a period of time or non-performant or disconnected, or their answers are going to be slow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're providing collateral and insurance that they won't behave maliciously or, in Byzantine ways otherwise. And they put that collateral up and can potentially lose it. The Chainlink 2.0 white paper goes into some pretty lengthy descriptions of the different mechanisms and the second layer of nodes and security and staking that's going to occur there. And that's maybe a little out of scope for this specific discussion, and maybe we want to stay zoomed in on sort of the baseline understanding for now, at least. But
yeah, so with that collateralization, I think you've touched on it extremely well. Are there any sort of familiar examples from regular everyday interactions that people would have in sort of their normal lives that would help them sort of understand collateralization as kind of an incentive to not behave badly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the concept of putting up a bond for performance of some form of work is not an unfamiliar one, right? I think, essentially somebody being a bonded contractor to say, hey, look, I'm going to provide this job at this level of quality within this duration of time. That's a familiar concept generally, and I think it's a decent example, right? I'm struggling to think of a more specific example at this moment. Maybe Jonny, do you have one off the top of your head?
No, that was a good example. Good answer.
I wonder how you guys feel about. There's an example I used recently where I said when you check into a hotel, for example, for the first time, the first thing that they do, even if you've paid in advance, is ask you for your credit card. And they sort of pre-approve it for a certain amount of money, so that if you cause any damage to the room while you're there, they can basically charge it to your account straight away, right? I've often described these kinds of staking mechanisms as a kind of ransom, right? You have to put up something, kind of give some capital over to someone else, and that's basically the promise that you're not going to behave badly. It gives them a reason to trust you because you've got something to lose.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I think from the other side, it's also when we get into a discussion about an open job market where nodes have a specific or limited amount of collateral, and there's a high selection of jobs or broad selection of jobs that they can take on. They're also going to want to know that, look, if I have to tie up X amount of collateral for Y amount of time, I need to be compensated Z percentage for that opportunity cost, right? So that's going to be a consideration for them too. But I think you're right, Mark. I think that's a great example and a really, really familiar one that people are, deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you guys for breaking that down. Mark, what about staking in DeFi? Can you break that down for us a little bit? Because like we said, it's all so different, how staking works,
Yeah.
whether it's blockchain or Oracle networks, and for DeFi specifically, how does staking work?
Yeah. So I think in, with regards to sort of DeFi protocols, staking, it does have a completely different meaning, because you're not necessarily securing anything, right? You're not actively putting something to ransom. Instead, what you're doing is providing capital to that market. So I would say that, staking is kind of this awkward catch-all term. I think that the term stake is much better suited to something like securing a network, so like a proof of stake protocol. In DeFi, though, I think the term deposit is probably a better term. So you're providing capital to something such that it can do stuff with that capital, and the work that it does produces profits, and those profits are then returned back to the people that provided that capital. So this is kind of in contrast to traditional banking systems, where banks don't really have any of their own money. All of that money comes from their customers, and then the banks then use that capital to do all kinds of different financial activities. And then generally they return the overwhelming majority of those profits back to themselves and distribute just a tiny amount of that capital back to the customers. The reorganization of the financial systems that is being strived for in DeFi is that all of the profits that are being generated on users' capital is returned back to those users entirely. There are some protocols that take a haircut, but protocols like Bancor don't take any haircut at all, and everything is returned to users. So yeah, it's not staking in the security sense. It's more like a deposit or a contribution.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I feel like clues in the name really. If it's really staking, if you're putting something at stake. I think a good example of that is like Aave security module. Even though it's in DeFi, you're staking something and staking on the security of that protocol. If there was an event, then you would be slashed, but you're essentially earning yield by, trusting the protocol by putting your collateral at stake.
There are hybrids. So I'd say that BNT is a hybrid token. It's like when a user stakes BNT in the Bancor protocol, it is simultaneously a part of the underwriting mechanism. And so the Bancor governance process is a proof of stake governance process. It's one of the reasons why our DAO is incentivized to continue making good decisions. But it is simultaneously a capital token, right? It's used to create markets and support liquidity across the protocol, and so it also earns additional fees that way.
So for Bancor, Bancor specifically, right? It has the governance purpose as well. But both of you had mentioned earning yield or earning rewards by staking, both with LinkPool and with Bancor. What are some of the negatives to staking? I guess not negatives, but what sort of issues or complications does it introduce?
I think in the Chainlink node space, a specific one that I think a lot of folks aren't thinking about, and it's something that we've been thinking about at LinkPool for a long time, right? The issue is that there's going to be a diminishing point of returns for an amount of capital staked onto a Chainlink node, right? There's some ceiling of useful capital generally for the network, like theoretically, and then also a ceiling of useful capital for a given node. What I mean by that is a given node is going to have an amount of jobs that require a specific amount of capital, right? Let's say that a node is serving a job that requires each node that serves the job to post up 100 link in capital, right? So that node has 10 jobs like that, so it needs 1,000 link total to stake onto those jobs, essentially, right? Let's for the sake of abstraction, let's think of it like that. That means that really only 1,000 link is going to be useful capital on that node at that time. 2,000 link isn't going to be more useful than 1,000. If we're imagining a situation in which that capital is pooled from other users, maybe there's some buffer, maybe it's 10%. So 1,100 link would be how much the node would want to have access to give people the opportunity to, exit without as much of a lockup period. So my point in this is that there's some, at a given time for a given node, some upper ceiling of useful capital that can have on it, and you're going to want to be able to gate access to receiving capital or putting capital on that node. That's something we've been thinking about for a long time at LinkPool, and it's part of the mechanism of our LinkPool token, the LinkPool staking allowance token, without getting too in depth. But that's a thing for specifically for Chainlink nodes. Obviously other situations for other protocols like, staking in a proof of stake network, the theoretical upper limit, and I'm showing a little ignorance. I'm sure that there's some upper limit threshold, but theoretically you could stake all the ETH onto validator nodes, and that could be a thing, and it would be potentially useful, right? There's some bonding curve that where the returns roll off over time, but you get the point, I think.
Yep. It's an interesting problem because, we've been thinking about this a long time, but to use Eric's example, if you need a 1,000 link locked up, or not necessarily locked up in a series of feeds to provide collateral, how much liquidity do you actually need in the pool? And sort of the balance between, yield and, the capital within the pool. So, it's a question of sort of how much extra we need on top in terms of managing the liquidity, and then balancing risk on then what, other things and other strategies you do with that link to try and, boost yield. It's an interesting problem to think about. And, for us, at least at LinkPool, we're very, very risk averse. So for us, the primary function of the pools is to provide collateral for Chainlink nodes, but then also sort of balancing, the sort of between risk and also liquidity in the pools as well, without going into too much detail.
So I think the risks for depositing capital to a DeFi protocol is that you really have to be quite confident that the financial strategy that it's implementing is going to be of benefit to you. And there are a very wide there is a very wide array of different ways that you can contribute to DeFi protocols that are supposed to be yield bearing. So one example is something like on a lending protocol. And so there, you are literally putting your tokens up for other people to take away. And in that case, they might be leaving their own collateral, but you're still exposed to sort of shortfall events where if that collateral is not sufficient to cover, the loan amount, if there's a sudden price change, then that is one of the risks that you're taking. On an AMM, one of the risks that you're taking is that the total fee revenue that is being generated on your liquidity is greater than the impermanent loss, right, or the divergence loss costs of providing that liquidity. So yeah, it's still kind of a staking sort of thing, but these are nuanced. I'd say that when you're staking for security purposes, you're really exposed to the behavior of whoever it is that you're giving your tokens onto. So for a link node, for example, if you're staking against that link node with native staking when that thing becomes available, then you really need to trust that node operator has the best intentions. And if something happens to them or they do something wrong, then I think the capital that you've provided is essentially at risk, right? If the node operator gets slashed, so do you. And this is pretty common for proof of stake protocols. So for example, blockchains like Cardano, which are purely proof of stake, the operators that are participating in the consensus algorithm need people to basically delegate ADA to that node. And if that validator makes a mistake, or if they stop operating the way that they're supposed to, then you can actually lose some of that stake. So I'd say that both of these are sort of financial risks. So there's the diminishing returns that LPL has just spoken about. But then there's also this other sort of financial downside risk. And I would say that this is common to both security staking and also DeFi staking.
Yep. Also, just on that point as well, it really talks to how important the reputation metrics are around the Chainlink network. Giving people quantitative data on how well that given node's performing, and how many feeds they service, and all the metrics around it. For us as well, we've thought about this for quite some time, but insurance mechanisms around the pools themselves. We've always sort of talked about this being native within the LinkPool protocol, but also thinking about different node operators. But then, if you think about creating an insurance mechanism and then expanding that to different node operators, as an insurance pool, you've always again got to think about the performance of the node, because if you've got a malicious node and they're backed by insurance, then they can just gain the insurance and misbehave with not much consequence. So it's a good problem to think about, but I'm looking forward to the developments of the staking protocol over this year.
I think that that's a good point about reputation. And this is, I'd say, especially true of DeFi protocols, because in general, it's it's very attractive if you are a criminal, right? If you are a criminal with some smart contract knowledge, that you can create a protocol that seems legitimate and get lots of people to contribute capital to it. And then, they can kind of run off with your money. And we have no shortage of examples of that, unfortunately. So yeah, that's another really great point. I think choosing the right project is as important in security protocols as it is in DeFi.
So normally I would wait until the end to kind of address some of the community questions, but something I had seen in a thread recently, and Jonny had expressed that diminishing returns is somewhat of a concern in regards to staking with LinkPool. Mark, somebody asked, how do you expect the Bancor yield to be worthwhile with no cap on the amount of link that can be deposited?
Yeah, it's a terrific question. So there's always going to be some sort of market equilibrium. As the LinkPool team have just pointed out, the capacity for the Chainlink network to produce, realizable returns for users is finite, right? It scales with the size of the network, and Chainlink is obviously growing at a huge pace. But at any point in time, there's still some, limit. And I think that the other thing, and I'm going to talk about this slightly more in this conversation later, is that I also think that it's important for community members and projects to realize that staking, as it competes for liquidity, can be extremely detrimental. And we've been fortunate enough to have a very recent, very topical example of this. But yeah, I think that it's going to require a bit of education. I think that communities everywhere in cryptocurrency are starting to learn how important liquidity is. And so I think that, as demand for staking increases, the returns on that staking are going to decrease. And that's going to make things like providing liquidity seem more attractive. And so I think it's natural and healthy for there to be this kind of push and pull between these two different systems. And I think that the community and the project are also going to want to, to have a good discussion surrounding the importance of liquidity as well. So I don't think that there's ever going to be, I don't think it's ever going to be the case where staking demand is so great that it makes sense for there to be, very thin liquidity for Link or for any other token. Having said that, I do expect it, I do expect there to be a huge amount of demand for it, especially in the beginning, and it will be interesting to see how the Chainlink project decides to cope with that. It could be that there's going to be, some limitations put in place, something like you can only participate in native staking if you have a sufficient amount of Link. It would surprise me, for example, if they allow like 1 link staking quantities or something like that, or sub 1 link staking quantities. And, it could be that the whole capacity of the network is throttled to some extent in order to keep the profitability of the network high enough that it makes sense to continue operating a node. But we'll wait and see. The same has been true for all DeFi protocols. I remember when Aave was getting really popular, and people quite, astutely started to ask, like, does it make sense for AMMs to continue competing with lending protocols? And of course, we see now that with the TVL on some of these lending protocols being as high as they are, that the APRs on said protocols are also dropping off quite quickly. So, there will be some equilibrium point where the whole sort of industry settles on the correct distribution of these assets across all of these different opportunities. And it should be that all of the APRs are quite similar across all of these different things over time. There are always going to be shocks to the system. So as, for example, the Chainlink network continues to grow, I expect that the APRs and things will grow with it as there's more and more demand for more and more operators. But there will be times where it plateaus or where the growth slows. And then I think things like market making will start to look more attractive, or when there's huge periods of price rediscovery on the Link token, that the AMM returns will be quite high. And that will cause some people to choose to come off of the network and back into AMMs. And this, I'm not saying that this is going to be dramatic, but I think that we will see slow adjustments over time, and that the market will continue to self-equilibrate.
So I know that you said you wanted to speak on liquidity a little bit later, but with you having mentioned that, I'm going to come back to another comment that I had seen in the community recently, and we were speaking about concerns with staking. And somebody in the community had expressed a concern. They said, I'm convinced by the LPL token and like its use case, what it does, just not by its liquidity, which is why I've been putting it off, which is why I've put it off for buying it. So what do you see as possible solutions to that? Mark, you mentioned it's an issue, and obviously Jonny and Eric, you wouldn't want someone not buying your token because of liquidity. What are some possible solutions you see to that as far as an issue with staking being?
So I think that it's probably, I want to give the floor to LinkPool just quickly to address that before I start talking about how we're developing mechanisms in Bancor 3 to address it.
It's a good question. We've been thinking about this for a while. I can't say anything concrete on it, but for us being LinkPool and the accessibility of staking, the token being liquid is, it's good for us and it's good for everyone. His ideas and sort of the sort of problem at hand and what we're trying to do to fix it, but ultimately, a lot of there's a lack of liquidity in LPL because people don't want to unstake their LPL to lose link rewards, basically, which is, for us is a fortification of what we're doing and the protocol in terms of like the staking mechanisms. But so sorry, Eric, I just saw you unmuted.
No, you're good. Somebody started calling me on the phone. I was going to say essentially that, of course, we don't want the pool to be closed necessarily, but the like you say, it is a confirmation that people are really interested in using the token for exactly its needed purpose. I think obviously I expect that Mark has got some interesting things about synergies between the possibilities between Bancor V3 and the LinkPool token and native LinkPool staking, but I'd hand it off.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you guys on the spot. I feel kind of bad about that. I hope you don't think that I just wanted to give you a chance to speak first. But yeah, one of the things that I will say is that it's this kind of illiquidity problem. It is characteristic of generally the best projects in the space, right? Whenever there is a token that has some staking utility, and that there's huge demand for that staking utility, it's very, very common, as I think Jonny just said, that the market sort of eats up that token so quickly and stakes all of it, that only a very thin fraction of the market cap is available as liquidity. And we've seen this in so many different situations. Things like SNX is one of the tokens that I bring up quite frequently, because I think it was, and still is, one of the most interesting projects in DeFi. And it was off to a really rocketing start, where the bulls on SNX bought such a significant proportion of the supply and staked it all in order to generate synthetic assets, that there was just a very, very tiny amount of SNX left for the market to speculate on. And it's one of the things that people pay attention to, right? Is what's the price impact going to be if I try to buy SNX? And similarly, if you're holding SNX, you're in sort of the awkward position of, how do I exit from this asset one day when I want to, when I want to retire, or if I want to, finally buy that car I've been, trying to save up for or whatever. It's a big problem. But it's not because the project is bad. It's if anything, it's because the project has been so successful. And so this is where demand for the token can actually be, paradoxically, hurtful for the project. Okay, and so one of the ways that I've been thinking about this, and one of the features that I've built into Bancor version 3, is this idea of having a fungible, composable ERC20 that represents all of the token that has been purchased. So Bancor is unique in the sense that it offers impermanent loss protection and single-sided staking. And so for a lot of projects, rather than just proof of ownership, right, which is kind of what the tokens are all about, we can start pivoting towards proof of liquidity provision. And this means that you no longer have to compete between, staking utility and liquidity. So for something like LPL, right, just as an example, rather than staking the LPL token directly, what could be done is accepting the single-sided pool token on Bancor as well. And coming back to what we were saying before about staking and as a securitization mechanism, or sorry, as a securing mechanism, I should say. The fact that the BN pool token is already representing just the staked token, so in this case LPL, and that it's protected from impermanent loss, it means that pool token will always represent the same number of LPL tokens or more over time. And so it actually ends up as more effective collateral. And so if you are setting up a protocol where you want people to buy your token because it gives them access, in this case, to something like link rewards, rather than have them stake the LPL token directly, they could stake the BN LPL token. And we're going to have contracts set up that are, already audited, and they're going to be audited 3 times. So you get very, very high assurance that these contracts work the way that they're supposed to. And you also get the benefit of Bancor's front end, right? So rather than having teams that are, should be spending all of their development resources on the actual goals of the project, spending time instead on developing staking contracts and, a beautiful front end for their users to interact with. Instead, they can outsource a lot of that effort to Bancor. So one example of this would be to set up essentially a liquidity mining contract, right? Or it looks like a liquidity mining contract, where the token that's being issued is Link, and the token that needs to be staked is BNLPL. Now that's just an example, right? That's just something that could be used using Bancor version 3 as it exists. But because the ERC20 is already composable and fungible, you don't even have to use Bancor's contract. You can just use the token and set up your own contract, and that way you can introduce slashing mechanisms and other things as well. And the beauty of this is that it serves exactly the same purpose, right? It's still a proof of ownership, right? You still have to actually buy the LPL tokens in order to stake them and create the BN LPL token. And similarly, it still represents the same financial hazard to the user if they are staking it for some security purpose. So in the case of the Chainlink project, financially speaking, it's equivalent to stake Link as it is to stake BN Link. The user has exactly the same stuff at stake, right? They still stand to lose the same amount of capital if they behave badly. But it means that you don't have to sacrifice the liquidity for the token in order for people to participate. And so these are the solutions that I've been building. And, as Bancor 3 is kind of, coming to, we've just released the code publicly. And so we've already had a bunch of projects contact us looking to implement exactly the type of solutions that I have spoken about. And so I do think that it is going to be something that the industry gravitates towards. I recently spoke at the Avalanche Summit and then at Cello, and a bunch of the people that I was speaking with there are already very familiar with this kind of paradox between staking utility and liquidity. And so, yeah, I do think that it's a profound change for the industry, and I'm hoping that there are going to be a large number of projects that see the value in what we're proposing.
Speaking of the derivatives, I just got a question from somebody, one of our listeners, and this is for Jonny and Eric. Will a link derivative token, like what you receive for providing liquidity, like what Mark is speaking about, be allowed to be staked, or must staked tokens be a traditional link token?
To answer that question bluntly, that largely depends on the Chainlink staking protocol itself. So depending on what actually happens, if Chainlink staking accepts derivatives, then we'll most definitely create pools that will also accept that derivative. But yeah, I mean, it's largely up to them. For us, at least, the composability of tokens, and what we've seen in the recent times of liquid staking and the secondary markets, at least for staking tokens like STETH, it's very important. We've been also thinking about this for a long time. When someone stakes Link with us, you'll also get a derivative token. That derivative token is then composable, and you'll probably see markets and ecosystems built on top of that as well, because that'll represent your stake that you've put into LinkPool, and you'd be able to use that in different apps and protocols to generate extra yield or do whatever you want to. Now, if Chainlink underneath accepted derivative tokens, then it'd be the same thing. You'd also get your derivative token from LinkPool would represent the mix, the basket of the derivatives that you've staked with us. But yeah, I mean, it just largely depends on what Chainlink want to do themselves. I personally feel like it might depend. It could depend on sort of the user requirements, based on the sort of the price feed or the application at hand, in whether it accepts derivatives based on inherited risk. Because if you accept link derivatives into a protocol, then you're also inheriting the risk of the underlying protocol. Don't want to badmouth any protocols, but it's always risk when you compose different tokens together in terms of underlying sort of security risks or gameable aspects of different protocols. But that could depend on sort of user requirements within certain applications, whether that was a bridge that was powered by CCIP, a certain price feed. It's hopefully in the future, once Chainlink staking is a reality, a lot of feeds that are created and governed by different people, they'll be able to decide on that for themselves, and you'll see a flourishing sort of market that'll accept maybe tons of derivatives and play on the mechanism in different ways.
I want to just quickly comment on something that Jonny just mentioned, which is things like the STETH token and other kinds of wrappers. And so these aren't new. We've seen versions of this over and over again, and we know that they're just not as attractive to traders as the underlying asset is. So, for example, I don't think STETH will ever be as liquid as ETH is, right? Even if it was the majority asset, I don't think that we will ever see, the same types of interest in trading that wrapper as we do trading the thing that underpins it. I think that in general, DeFi has got this whole thing upside down, right? We shouldn't be creating wrappers of tokens and then trying to trade those wrappers. What we should be doing is letting the underlying asset be liquid and then stake the wrappers, right? The thing that you are creating should be the thing that's staked, and we should just let the thing at the floor level, right, at the ground level, remain liquid. So in the case of staked ETH, I guess I'm not delusional, right? I'm not suggesting that this is going to be the case, but just imagine, right? Humor me for a second, that instead of staking ETH on the against an ETH validator, then instead you staked BN ETH, right? If ETH was staked on Bancor and it produced the BN ETH token, again, it has exactly the same financial properties as the ETH does. In fact, slightly better, because it's worth more and more ETH over time as trading fees accrue to it. So in a sense, it's actually better collateral for security purposes than the underlying token is. But more importantly, the ETH itself, right, that the wrapper represents, is still available as primary liquidity. And so we can still have something like an Ethereum ETF, right? If the overwhelming majority of Ethereum becomes staked on, validator nodes, it's unclear how attractive that asset is going to be anymore. If the ETH staking demand overwhelms the market, then ETH is at risk of becoming illiquid. And they're never, I doubt that, if these financial regulatory bodies are still, umming and ahhing over whether or not an ETF for ETH is attractive or allowable, I promise you, things like staked ETH as an asset are going to be even more worrisome. So yeah, that's kind of my thesis here, is that we want to keep the thing itself, right, the actual base token liquid, and we should be staking wrappers of those tokens rather than the tokens themselves.
So I would just want to make sure I'm following, Mark. So for all of these different platforms that we'll use ETH or Link as an example. I mean, everybody has their own form of a derivative, right? So if you get a Link or BN Link, are you suggesting or saying that then Chainlink should accept those derivatives that are formed throughout?
Yeah, maybe, right? And I'm not insisting on it, right? It's not something that I'm not actively campaigning for it. I'm just using it because it's a familiar example, and I think that it's so well understood that it's a convenient example to use. But I think that things like ETH and Link are so well established that it's going to be very difficult, even with regards to the way that the contracts are written, to accept any kind of wrapper. And so we're kind of going to be stuck that way. But for new projects that are considering, what their mechanisms should look like, I think that it does make sense to consider how that staking demand is going to compete for liquidity, and whether or not that is a problem for them in the long run. Because as history has demonstrated, it does become a problem, and it can become a problem quite quickly. I think that the A-Link example that you mentioned just now is an interesting one, because it's still just available for lending, right? And in a way that is supporting short selling. It's not truly liquid in the sense that Aave supports exchange. I guess it's a type of exchange, because people have to leave one other token in order to pick up the link. But yeah, A-Link, in my view, is not a liquidity derivative, right? Lending liquidity is not the same as exchange liquidity. And there is no other DEX that can offer a single-sided pool token that maintains its price exposure to the underlying asset. So for example, if you were to create a Link USDC pool and receive, like, say, for example, on Uniswap V2, and then use the V2 pool token that it generates, the problem is that as Link moves around in price, the pool token itself will deviate from the Link price, which would mean that people that are using it as staking collateral against the network might have, slightly less, or sometimes a lot less, capital at stake. And this can undermine the security of that mechanism. But with the BN Link pool token, it is as liquid as the Uniswap V2 pool token is. However, it is insured against impermanent loss. So the financial risk that the staker has is the same. Whereas if it was a Uniswap V2 pool token, for example, it wouldn't be the same. Or even a Uniswap V3 NFT, it wouldn't be the same. So this is a unique product that we're trying to introduce with Bancor version 3, right? Something that has the same financial properties as the thing that you have contributed, and therefore can be used as a substitute, right? But it's not even just a substitute; it's a better substitute because it allows the underlying token to remain liquid, and it actually garners more value over time. So yeah, it's not the same as using A-Link, but it's in the sense of having something that represents just the underlying token, they do have that in common.
Okay, I understand that. I have another question, if you don't mind, in regards to the like BN Link, like you were talking about. Somebody asked if staking BN Link in a node, if it's not possible, would Bancor be willing to stake some of the deposited Link in a pool into a third-party node like LinkPool?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this is something that I've spoken about before, because I don't expect that the Chainlink network will, certainly, I don't think they will at first, except BN Link. I'm hoping that in the future that they will, but that's going to be a long process with a lot of discussions. With Bancor version 3, we are embracing this idea of super fluid liquidity, and we are partitioning the tokens that are provided to the protocol between the AMM use case and other use cases, and that will include things like staking on a third-party node. And I think that we would be very interested to collaborate with LinkPool to help them get more link collateral to support their operations. And if there's a way that we can support that on Bancor version 3, and I'm 99% sure that there is, then it's something we're enthusiastic to do.
Thank you. Rick, I'm going to get to you in just a moment. I have one more question from somebody that had submitted this previously for Jonny and Eric. And this is going into the node as a service. So maybe before I ask the question, you can just give the listeners an idea, give us a brief of what the node as a service is that you provide.
Sure. So nodes as a service really is to lower the barrier of entry to, participate in the Chainlink network and just run your own blockchain infrastructure. It's really a two-click deploy method to spin up your own Chainlink node and start experimenting. At the minute, it's mostly a position for developers, so people looking to get involved. If you're an avid Web3 developer, you can load the app and literally get a Chainlink node for free and then start experimenting on different testnet networks, not just on Ethereum as well, but every testnet network that Chainlink supports. And in the future, that will be expanding to different mainnets and also different products, and also third parties being able to list their infrastructure products as well, which is something I'm particularly excited about.
Eric, I see that you're unmuted. Do you want to add something to that?
I was just going to say that you can check it out right now at naas.link, nas.link, naas.link.
I'm actually going to post that up here on the top of the spaces before we end the call. I should do it now, as a matter of fact. But my question is from one of our community members, how you plan to monetize the LinkPool service. Now, you mentioned it's going to be a free service. Will it always be a free service? They're wondering if there's going to be a subscription fee in the future, or will there be a percent based on the revenue earned?
Great question. We anticipate it being a subscription service. The idea is that, as opposed to something that would be more like a hands-on managed node that we would take on, potentially white glove for a client, this would be something where we're providing the infrastructure, and the operation, the day-to-day operation and management of the node itself is up to you. So the idea is that be provided as a subscription service with potential add-on services like a dedicated full node just for your node as opposed to one from a pool of full nodes, or add-on API subscriptions for premium subscriptions for adapters that we make available, things of that nature. So Again, obviously, like Jonny said, we want it to be an open market where other infrastructure providers are offering their services there as well. We're interested in the decentralization and collaboration between infrastructure providers in that way. But yeah, our hope for now is to make the services on testnet especially available for developers so they can rapidly iterate towards integrating Chainlink as their solution. Obviously, we want to make that available for, folks building in hackathons, and of course, folks really building things for production.
Yep. It'll be, I suppose, to just expand on subscriptions as well, it'll all be Web3 based, as sort of Eric mentioned. So, it won't be typical subscriptions, but, you'll get NFTs representing your infrastructure, and you'll be able to, pick and choose from products, maybe Chainlink nodes from different node operators and different infrastructure providers. It's at the minute, it's just us offering testnet nodes on different testnets for Chainlink nodes, but in the future, it's really going to expand and follow the same ethos as Market.link as well, where other infrastructure providers will be able to take part.
Their follow-up to that, and Rick, just be patient with me, was in order to interact with those nodes that are being built, through LinkPool, the LPL token will be necessary for those as well.
In order to either spin up a node or interact with those nodes themselves. Now, the LinkPool token wouldn't be necessary for that. It'd be the precise way that we're going to bill for it in the subscription service we haven't shared publicly yet, but the LinkPool token wouldn't be necessary to spin up a NAS node or to make use of the NAS node, no.
Okay, awesome. Thank you guys so much. Rick, you have been so patient. Thank you so much. If you want to go ahead and ask your question, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This is such a huge and good topic. I thank all of the hosts for coming in and sharing their expertise. I'd like to state somewhat of a premise statement, make an observation, and then pose a question. So Mark has spoken before, and I think it's such an extraordinary, I would say, thought process to go through when he talks about this scenario where super productive projects are so popular that the liquidity gets gobbled up. And let's say like in Chainlink situation, everybody's super excited about when staking comes out, that all of it gets sucked up, all of it gets staked, and then there's no liquidity, which has the opposite effect as far as the value goes, because if there's nobody trading it, therefore there's not a market for it, and then actually the value is almost zero. And I think there's a lot of merit to that whole concept. With that being said, I've kind of thought that through with Chainlink, and naturally Chainlink still has plenty of liquidity they haven't released yet. So I think that is somewhat of not of a challenge, even if they announce staking. But it does bring up the question of like LinkPool, because Bancor still somewhat mints and burns as necessary for the health of the protocol. And I see this being a situation in all of DeFi in several areas where they have successful tokens, and that is those that have come out and announced that they have these hard caps on the token supply. If they run into this problem with liquidity, naturally one of the options could be that they do choose to start minting. And I'm curious, and it's funny how we've made inflation, that term, as a negative term versus it just being a mechanism that can be used for good or bad in an environment. And I'm curious if LinkPool ever would see themselves, if they were into those type of scenarios, ever trying to make that level of decision. And if they did, what would they see as possible upsides or downsides into taking that kind of role?
For us at least, and Link as well, the circulating, the supply of the token is fixed. It's a good question though. I mean, you've really got to think about this in terms of the size of the Chainlink network versus, the supply and what is used as liquidity. It goes back to the point of diminishing returns as well. For us as LinkPool, we're only going to accept a certain amount of Link to begin with. It's not like, we're going to see a huge rush and a free-for-all of everyone being able to stake their Link, because, the yield would go to the floor and it wouldn't really be much benefit in doing that. How that sort of plays out in terms of the liquidity that's left on the markets for swaps versus what's staked is, I suppose, yet to be seen. But, is, for me at least, there's a lot to be said about the security and the amount of Link that is used as collateral in the network to enforce its security. And I suppose it's not going to be a huge shock to begin with, and the size of the network and the amount of collateral that is needed across all the different networks that Chainlink will support will grow probably substantially over time. But I suppose it's a bit of an unknown, at least to be honest. And at least to begin with, a lot of the amounts that can be staked will probably be capped. So it's not like you'll see the dry up of liquidity to a large degree on AMMs, at least.
Rick, did that kind of answer your question, or were you speaking in regards to the LPL?
Yeah, I mean, the LPL is one, and I just think it's. I'm just curious to get each of their thoughts in general as projects. I think might run into this challenge if they get into somewhat of this. Everybody's trying to set up limited tokens. Everybody's trying to set up these deflationary burn mechanisms, and I think they don't realize sometimes they may be setting themselves up for a bigger challenge than had they not been there. And I do know that on a lot of these contracts, there is the ability to start minting, even though the contract has a stated hard cap on it. And I was just running through a scenario where, what would be the potential consequences in some of these thought leaders' minds if a project was to say, our liquidity is so poor right now, we have such high demand, much like the Ciscos of the world did stock splits and things going on. If that is something they see possibly happening or becoming a reality, or if not, what would be the consequences of such things possibly taking place?
Well, I can flat out say, at least, for the LPL token and Link, there's no mechanism at all to be able to mint more tokens. So you can check through like the LPL tokens contract and Link. I suppose, for us and LPL, we're in a position, at least in terms of like how the tokenomics work and the mechanism. If the company lets go of any of the LPL, then it's detrimental to the company. But then we're also in the position that around 98% of the circulating supply of LPL is staked, and then you get a liquidity crunch on markets because of that. It's not really good for people looking to buy and participate in what we do, and also for people to exit their positions if they want to as well. We've got some ideas on that, but at the end of the day, for us, with how the token works, sort of any idea or any mechanism that you sort of think of or come up with just results in essentially dilution of rewards, and it sort of goes against the ethos of what we've been talking about in terms of the diminishing returns in terms of staking and yield, for example.
I think that last point is especially good. That if for example we did implement something like if the LinkPool project decided, whatever, we'll accept the BNLPL token in place of LPL or alongside LPL, because then at least more of the token can be liquid. What it does open up the possibility of is people then buying more of that LPL to stake it alongside what's already there. And so you can end up with this kind of doubling up effect that would, essentially dilute out the rewards. And so this is, it's another element to, the types of competition that we see, and kind of comes back to the point that I was making before about, the demand for Link staking on the Link network when native staking becomes supported. It could potentially overwhelm the network, right? I know that the Chainlink Marines are super excited for this, and I think that's an extremely justified position. But yeah, if there is so much Link entering to the network that the APRs become low, then it kind of goes against the whole purpose of the project. And so it's really about scaling and adjusting for those demands, but you also then need to have liquidity available for those equilibria to even establish themselves. So it's not like there's a single grand unifying solution for this. And I'm not claiming that Bancor version 3 is, the holy grail of, of what the industry needs. But I think it's close, right? I think that we do have a really compelling solution that does allow the markets to equilibrate and does allow, that competition between, the returns that you're getting for staking a particular use token like LPL, and the trading revenue that it can generate. So yeah, I mean, I would be so happy to collaborate further with LinkPool on this, because I do think that it's compelling. But as Jonny has said, it's not just here's a solution and there's no reason to not use it. There are these very complex sort of behind the scenes considerations that I don't think communities are always exposed to. So yeah, it's complicated no matter what. But yeah, I do think that the solution that we've developed is a compelling one, and I'm hoping that not just LinkPool, but that a whole bunch of other projects that have this kind of competition between staking and liquidity will sort of talk to us and see what we can do together to alleviate it. The other thing that I wanted to address, oh, sorry, Jonny, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to say, I mean, you talked about the points well. Bancor V3, at least the native staking of assets would at least alleviate some of the, people would still get link rewards and get the benefits of, staking as if they were staking LPL natively in the protocol. It's just one of them things. If we accepted, let's say, like BN LPL into the protocol, it's the problem you talked about, where we're essentially doubling up, and then it could result in more LPL being staked in the pool with a mix of LPL than what's actually circulating, which is just not really a good position to be in.
Yeah. So one of the let's just go ahead and have this conversation. So one of the advantages to Bancor version 3 is that the actual available trading liquidity is adjustable. And this is something that I expect that we're going to have conversations about wide out in the open, right? So it's not the case that just the people that are staking the token decide how liquid it is, right? The Bancor network on version 3 will have infinite capacity, right? Unlimited capacity for whatever tokens are being provided. But the actual available trading liquidity can be any number between 0 and that amount. So I fully expect that the Bancor DAO will be really interested to talk with the project teams themselves about how much liquidity is actually appropriate, because we can set the curve in such a way that it becomes prohibitively expensive to continue buying LPL and staking it for that purpose. And so it is possible to adjust these things. And that's a dial that we don't have access to before Bancor version 3, right? You can imagine that discussing with a fiduciary or with a financial expert within your own project about how much liquidity there should be, right? Or what would be the ideal liquidity? Or, if demand is growing, then maybe liquidity should be shrinking. And so we can actually play with this dial now in a very decentralized way, because the project teams could, in much the same way that we are today, discuss exactly what the project needs and what's healthy, and invite community members to discuss that with us. And then, via the Bancor DAO governance process, it's very easy to set up a proposal, and within a few days, dial in the amount of liquidity that you want, or dial out the amount of liquidity that you don't want to be there anymore. And I think that is a really interesting property, where we can actually keep the markets functional. It no longer has to come down to sort of random market sentiment about how much liquidity that there should be, right? We no longer have to trust the mercenaries of DeFi with something as important as the available liquidity for our tokens. We can now make it much more of a democratic process, and one where the token founders themselves can be a thought leader in how much liquidity is available for their token. So yeah, I hear what you're saying, but it is something that it's not completely out of the realm of control. It's something that can be influenced, and I mean that in the the most productive sense. That it is a metric that you want to be able to dial in, right? If there's not enough liquidity, it's helpful to be able to boost it. And if there is too much liquidity, it's also helpful to be able to dial it back. And this is something that we can do extremely inexpensively now, because before Bancor version 3, the only way to get more liquidity was to essentially pay for it, right? You would have to either produce liquidity mining rewards or something else in order to get people to provide that liquidity for you, or have the token team provide it themselves, which is not always financially feasible. But with Bancor version 3, if there's plenty of liquidity there, we can just move it up and down as required. And I think that this is another feature of Bancor version 3 that we haven't really discussed in detail out in the open, but certainly something that I think is appropriate for this conversation.
Yep, completely agree on that, Mark, and it's probably something we should talk about in more detail, to be honest, because at least depending on the toggles and staking LPL directly into the pools may incentivize more liquidity, because then people would be able to essentially become a liquidity provider while also being open to the emissions that go through the LPL pool. And from a Bancor, like the protocol point of view as well, Bancor would then also be open to staking Link natively through LinkPool, as just providing that LPL through the pools with Bancor v3 would then also open up Bancor to staking Link natively through the pools also. So it seems like a great option.
Yeah, and then the ability to say, look, with the market doing whatever it's doing, or with users overwhelming the demand for staking, to be able to put up a proposal that details exactly what the right decision is and why we think that is the right decision, and then getting the community to vote on it, I think is an extremely Web3 adherent way of managing these emerging markets.
Completely.
So somebody just tagged me in something on Twitter here in regards to the conversation, and what they wrote was, I believe Rick and Mark are not taking into account that the constant selling pressure of Chainlink nodes in order to compensate their high costs would greatly improve the Link liquidity situation. How would Bancor adapt if the lack of liquidity is not a problem?
That depends on what you mean, right? Just because the Chainlink nodes are selling Link doesn't mean that the Link is going to be liquid, right? In a way, that's one of the scenarios that everyone in the space is incentivized to avoid, right? We just saw with Itchy, right, this week, what happens when there's selling pressure and thin liquidity, right? The token went from $145 to $1.80. And that's exactly why having sufficient liquidity in order to absorb these kinds of market decisions, right? Whichever way the market is going to drift, is so important. If the Chainlink node operators are consistently selling Link, and I imagine that they will be in order to cover costs, as the community member has quite astutely observed. The question is, who are we trusting with the Chainlink price, right? Chainlink already prides itself as being sort of this beacon of security and decentralization, and more importantly, trustlessness. And what's interesting is that as we dry up on-chain liquidity, right, through decentralized exchanges such as Bancor, but not exclusively, right? The same argument applies to Uniswap, to SushiSwap, and everyone else. If that on-chain liquidity dries up because the community has decided that they would rather stake, then we end up putting the price discovery entirely in the hands of private market makers. And that's not very secure. and it's also not very trustless, right? You're essentially trusting a handful of individuals to be honest and, forthcoming with how they decide to make those markets. And we already know, and again, we've got a very good example from recent times, just how little we can trust them. There was, I'm sure everyone remembers the Ronin hack, and it was, I think, the world record now, something like $600 million drained, and that this should have had a pretty catastrophic effect on the AXS price, and it didn't for quite a while. And one of the things I told to one of my friends who was planning on shorting AXS, this was way after that original short that no one noticed got liquidated, that it's really a bad time to do stuff, because it really seems like the overwhelming majority of AXS liquidity was stuck on Ronin, and it was. And that meant that the price of AXS was completely under the influence of Binance market makers. And I said, and this is a wild accusation, right? I don't want anyone in this call to think that I am, Chicken Little or something, but I speculated that if I was a market maker working for Binance right now, I am incentivized to keep the AXS price as high as I possibly can until I get it off of my books. And this is exactly what we saw. This isn't new behavior. We also saw this during the 2008 financial crisis. There was this thing called a credit default swap that was essentially an insurance against the mortgage markets. And what was interesting is that even as mortgage default rates began to climb, the insurance against that that specific event from happening, the premiums on it continued to go up, which just doesn't make any sense. And we now know, right, with the benefit of hindsight, it was because the market makers working for the banks were incentivized to keep the prices up until the banks could get rid of, could basically get rid of all of these options from themselves, right, limit their own exposure. And so I'm only pointing these examples out because this was the number one reason why DeFi was established in the first place, was because we know we can't trust, the handful of private market makers that are active in the world with our best interests. And maybe nor should we. Of course they represent themselves. And of course they're going to protect themselves if they can. But it's just not fair, right? We even saw during the nickel squeeze, I'm sure that a handful of listeners on the call probably saw this as well. But the nickel squeeze was so catastrophic that the people in control of those markets decided to roll back some of the trades that had already occurred in order to protect, in particular, one very high net worth individual who had lost a huge amount of money on that short. So yeah, it's we know that we can't trust it. Right, it's why we're here. It's why DEXs and Bancor were invented. And so to say that it's okay for on-chain liquidity to dry up and we can just put everything in the hands of private market makers, I would say is naive, at least. And I don't want to suggest that the person who asked this question is naive, but the concept is naive. And it's something that we continue to struggle against every day. This influence from traditional finance into decentralized finance is slowly creeping in, and we have to, I think, dig in our heels and continue to build a wall between that kind of behavior and the kind of things that we are striving for in DeFi.
Thank you for addressing that, Rick. I want to give you a chance to, but before I do, I just want to welcome anybody who's listening to please put up your hands and join us if you have any questions. We are kind of getting to that point in time where we're going to have to end the call soon. And I don't want to do it without inviting any of our audience up to speak. So please feel free to do that in the meantime. And Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that first of all, it's a great observation by that the person that posted that. And for full disclosure, I'm a huge Link supporter, as you can tell by my handle. It was one of the first major DeFi projects I invested in and still invest in. And I don't necessarily believe that this liquidity problem is necessarily, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I just think it's a great thought exercise as an example because I'm so bullish on Link long term. But when you do look at the the potential upside. Let's just say some of the hopium that we all have in place for where Link could possibly go, the percentage of the total market that Link could capture once smart contracts really get adopted and they're really stored as collateral to secure these contracts happens, and the price of Link goes to the moon. Then what you also have there is what I think that could be a potential problem that may help, but doesn't necessarily fix, is that the amount of nodes compared to the market demand would be relatively minuscule. And if the token price is super high, then the cost for the nodes doesn't necessarily go up in proportion. So therefore, they would have to sell even less Link to become whole to cover their positions and their costs. And I think that then sets up this diminished returns, if you will, on the value of Link and its availability if the market demand continues to go up, while it's not going to be a direct reflection of costs that the nodes incur. So that's why I think it's definitely going to be relieving some pressure. But if we really see the type of crazy growth and value that a lot of us hope to see, then it's just again a thought exercise that I think is healthy and worthwhile to discuss and go over. That's all.
I just want to second something that Rick said there. I'm also like a huge believer in Chainlink. And I don't want anyone to think that I'm a doomsayer or anything like that. I know that a lot of this thought experiment, it's hyperbolic and it's designed to be, right? If you want to understand something or the effect of something, sometimes it's just helpful to think about it in a familiar situation. And Link just happens to be both, the topic of this AMA and a system and token that everyone is familiar with. But I don't think that the Chainlink project is naive enough, or actually naive at all, I should say. They're absolutely the market experts, and I'm sure that they can see these kinds of problems miles away, even further away maybe than I can. And so I don't expect it to be an upcoming problem. I'm sure they've got solutions behind the scenes that we haven't been made aware of. But until then, it's still helpful for me to discuss this feature of Bancor version 3, with reference to Link, just because it's so familiar. But I'm not saying that Link is going to have this problem. It's just it just is a helpful example to reach for.
Thank you guys so much. Last call. Anybody wants to get up and ask any of our speakers any questions, please do. But I just wanted to thank you guys because it was great to finally have our part 2 of our original AMA. And it's always a pleasure speaking with Jonny and Eric and Mark and Rick. Thank you for jumping up here. And I'm definitely looking forward to not only staking, but seeing what kind of comes of the conversation here in regards to the liquidity and everything else. And with that, I have Andy. Give me 1 second. Andy, you are our last speaker. Oh, where are you?
Yeah, I'm here. I came a tad late. I'm a duck here. But important question with regards to staking, kind of like composability with LinkPool. Then this may have been asked, so forgive me if it has. But we've seen like the development of staked ether be like collateral and kind of used in DEXs and kind of create their own liquidity pools and basically like. Eventually, I can see a future where DeFi kind of has staked ETH as as like the main layer of settlement rather than just ETH. Is there a possibility for like a staked Link token in the future that can be used in DeFi via LinkPool, or that is composable and has more use case and utility than just staking? And again, I apologize if this has been asked.
No, it's good, Andy. Sorry, Eric, and hello, Andy the duck. Yeah. I mean, we're at least going to be providing derivatives that represent your state's Link. So, essentially, what you see with STETH, you're going to get a derivative that represents Link. And in terms of secondary markets and what that can be used for, that will be determined by, the protocol's governance and what people want to do with it. But yes, completely, we will be providing a derivative that represents your state's linked amount.
Yeah, that's been a topic of research for us for a long time, as long as we've been talking about, essentially as long as we've been talking about pooled staking. And it's one that comes up less frequently, right? We talked earlier in the call about derivative link getting staked onto nodes. But Andy, that's a great question. Providing a derivative for link that's already staked onto nodes. It's a good one. Appreciate that. Also, good to chat with you, Andy.
G'day, Andy. I just want to quickly respond to that as well. The question was raised in a slightly different way at the beginning of the call, but I can reiterate some of the points that I made. I'll try and be as quick as I can. But basically, I think you're right to observe that things like staked ETH and RETH and several others, they have got a presence in DeFi, but I really can't imagine a world where the staked version, right, the staked wrapper of ETH becomes more important than ETH itself. And one of the examples that I gave was that, several financial regulators around the world are already considering things like an ETF for ETH. And I don't think that they would ever consider an ST-ETH, ETF. It just, maybe I'm wrong, right? I'll spin on a dime if we ever see that happen. But I do think as a tradable liquid asset, it's really ETH itself that is important and not the wrappers. And so what I said was that I think that we've got the whole thing upside down. Rather than take the thing that the market already knows and then stake it and then teach the market or try and force the market to trade and speculate on a wrapper, it makes more sense to use a wrapper as the thing that gets staked, because then it's just the project or just the network that has to accept the wrapper and learn how to use it. And we can continue to leave the underlying asset as the thing that gets speculated on and traded and bought and sold. So yeah, I think that we will see things like link wrappers, and they'll, LPL has already said that they've been discussing, creating one, and I imagine that we'll see more of them. But it's even that there's going to be this kind of variety where different projects offer different wrappers, that it does end up with, splintered liquidity for the token, and it makes it sort of more opaque. And so I don't think that that's the best solution. I still think the best solution is to stake the wrapper and let the underlying asset remain liquid. But it's an excellent question. Thank you for asking it.
Yeah, and I understand the security importance as well in terms of the wrap tokens compared to like the underlying Link or Ethereum tokens. And I mean, truly it's coming from a perspective of, just kind of like trying to get the most out of everything in DeFi in terms of like capital efficiency and productivity. So yeah, I appreciate the in-depth answers, guys, and great stuff.
Thank you so much, Andy. And again, thank you, Jonny, Eric, and Mark. I genuinely appreciate you guys and have enjoyed the AMA. And I hope to, if not sooner, definitely do it again once Chainlink staking is announced.
I just wanted to take a minute as well. The first time I did an AMA with these guys, I was accused of being combative and argumentative. So I just wanted to take this moment to say that I am truly in awe of what LinkPool is accomplishing and continuing to accomplish, and I have nothing but respect for Jonny and Eric. And I hope that neither of you thought that I was being argumentative or critical or anything like that. I'm just here to discuss what I see as liquidity problems, because it is my field, and I meant nothing but the warmest regards for LinkPool and for Chainlink as well.
I appreciate that, Mark, and same to you. Appreciate everything you guys are doing, and yeah, thank you. I didn't take anything from the first AMA like that at all. So thank you.
We had a great time chatting with you the first time. Had a great time chatting with you this time. Glad to be back on and having a great discussion again. It's been a ton of fun.
Let's keep it going.
Questions?
Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say, let's keep it going. I really enjoyed chatting with you guys.
Back at
Is there any more questions? Can people stay on, or have we got to call it early?
Yeah, I'm happy to stay on if you guys are.
Does anybody have any questions? Okay, well, I have a question then, and I'm just going to ask it because I kind of held back. we were speaking about the solutions that Mark was thinking of. And Jonny, you had mentioned a couple of times, and I wanted to ask, kind of didn't, that you were kind of thinking and playing with your own solutions. Is that something that you're able to speak more on? Is it somewhere along the lines of what Mark was thinking as well? Can you give us any sort of info on it?
Solutions to what? The liquidity problem?
Yes.
I can't really talk about it more. At least in the future, we'll, I suppose, be talking more about what we're going to be doing in terms of staking and the pools. But at least for now, I can't really talk about it much more. But, you know, we are thinking about this and sort of thinking about how we benefit the holders and everything that we're doing going forward. So, you know, unfortunately not. I can't spill more details.
I had to ask. I had to.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Eric, you unmuted yourself. Did you want to add something to that? Well, not that you
No.
can. I think John kind of let you know.
Nope.
Just don't do it.
Not this time.
All right. Well, I don't think we have any more questions. I think you guys kind of answered all of them from the community. Every sort of question that I got or comment has really been addressed. You guys have just been fantastic.
When moon?
Tonight.
That was so quick, Eric.
That was so quick.
That was so fast.
The only other question that I got, Mark, and since we're okay to stay on for another minute, was somebody was wondering, are you inside and do you own birds? Are you sitting outside or are you at a bird sanctuary? It's one of the three.
Yeah, so this call started for me at 6 o'clock in the morning. And so I just walked outside so that I don't wake my girlfriend who's still sleeping. And so, yeah, at dawn, you know, all of the birds in Melbourne come out. So, yeah, I'm just in my backyard right now walking around on my telephone.
It's perfect. Now we all know. So to everybody who messaged me about it, they sounded beautiful, by the way.
They are beautiful. They're very brightly colored.
Sounds pretty comfy, Mark.
Well, thank you guys again for being here. And like I said, I hope that the conversation continues, and I look forward to seeing the sort of solutions that you guys all come up with for the issues and challenges that we were talking about earlier. And if not sooner, definitely when Chainlink staking is announced, I hope to have you guys back.
We look forward.
Thank you so much, Jen.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. Enjoy the rest of your day, and Jonny, your night. Eric, I don't know where you are, but I hope you have a good one too.
Thanks, Jen. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. We'll talk to you guys
Yeah.
soon. Thank you so much.
Cheers, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.